There never were any damn snakes in Ireland, the stranger said, pounding his mug on the bar. Flecks of flat green beer slapped Moira across the face. Easy there, champ, she said. It's just a legend. Need another? Please, he said, pushing the mug across the bar. And it's not a legend. It's a lie. Moira grabbed the mug and reached for the tap, but she hesitated. This is, what, 4 already for you? You sure I shouldn't cut you off? The stranger bowed his head. Moira couldn't help but notice a yellowish-green tint to his skin. The whites of his eyes were a sickly piss yellow as well. Jaundiced, she thought. I'll quieten down, the stranger said. I don't mind St. Patrick's Day. It's just that particular damn story. Moira filled the stranger's mug and pushed it back to him. Yeah? What, you got a pet snake or something? Herpesologists or whatever? Nothing like that. First of all, St. Patrick had nothing to do with anything. He was a wizened old missionary. The natives humoured him. They sprinkled a little Christ on top of their celebrations to keep money flowing from Rome. St. Patrick brought money to build churches, dig wells. You talk like you knew him, Moira said. It was all fine until the money stopped coming. St. Patrick's cavalier attitude toward conversation had been noticed. Rome cut off the gold supply and left St. Patrick in a lurch. He'd promised ransoms to the Norse villages to keep the raiding to a minimum. That's when a few locals near Slemish told him that there were plenty of gold to be had in Ireland, if you knew where to look. Moira leaned across the bar. The stranger smelled like cheap beer with a tang of something else. An old purse, leather gone bad. The green folk had gold, the locals said. They hoarded it in a cavern near Lochpur's Lane. A natural overflow from the loch showered the caves below with mist. And when the sun hit the mist just right, it created rainbows. The stranger drained his mug, and Moira refilled it instinctively. The green folk lived in the caverns surrounding Lochpur's Lane. They were half fish or dragon, some said, due to their green scales and yellow eyes. It was a half leap from there to calling us devils. They came with nets and pikes. Few survived. Us, said Moira. Us, aye, said the stranger. They took our gold from those shimmering rainbow caves and left the lot of us to rot by the shores of the loch. I don't know when St. Patrick got directly thrown into the story. He was miles away, haggling with the Norse, the leprechaun we call ourselves. Imagine what that got bastardized to. The stranger sighed and reached into his pocket. He flicked a heavy gold token onto the bar. That ought to cover my tab, and more, he said. Just remember, there were never any damn snakes in Ireland.
Mrs. Yesterday, deleted author. Dunsany House had gone to the dogs. Mrs. Callahan did her best to preserve the upstairs master, but the rest of the estate was sliding into a tacky decline. When the family sold it to be converted to a historic bed and breakfast, only loyalty, and perhaps a numbing sense that she had nowhere else to go, prompted her to stay. That, and the pleas of her husband, who had lived there all his years. Had he survived to see what would become of the place, cracked molding and shoddy pipework, he'd surely have urged the family to donate it to the National Trust instead, and both of the Callahans would have resigned at once. Too late now. Here she was, a custodian of Edwardian trinkets and dilute nostalgia. Of course, the house was full of stories, as such houses often are, and she shared them when the mood struck her. But the haunts that thrilled her as a young girl now seemed quaint at best. The specter of a lesser Tudor noble would be incongruous here. Who could imagine the gray baronet pacing the dingy linoleum, clutching a bleeding pike wound, gently moaning over the rattle of the window-mounted air conditioners? To say nothing of the white bride. A euphemism, of course. Her tattered dress bore little resemblance to a bridal gown, save for its long train. Better, though, to say bride than banshee. As a child, Mrs. Callahan heard the white bride once, long after midnight, not long before the young master died of a leaky heart. For a moment, she thought the sound had been the boy's mother, but that scream was inhuman. And what was more, it had come from outside. She had not dared to look out the window, but she always remembered. Years later, when her husband passed, she heard nothing at all. Now it is December 5th, 1968, long after midnight. Something has wakened Mrs. Callahan. A soft noise, almost like the wind. But there is no wind outside, only snow. No, snow and something else, thin and gauzy against the drifts. It is her, and softly, it is screaming. It has been screaming quietly for years on end, but Mrs. Callahan never heard until now. Trembling, the old caretaker rises from her bed. She looks outside. It draws closer. Soon it is inches from the glass. Eyes wide, mouth gaping. Mrs. Callahan's eyes are wide too. When she finally speaks to the bride, it is in a whisper. "We missed you so much." She slides back the latch and lets the window swing open. Old McGinty by the Prowler. I'm frightened when it's close to that time of year, when it's March and the 17th draws near. While the celebrations may be joyous in parts of the world, I know death approaches at any given moment. Every wiggle and jiggle from a charm bracelet makes me cautious, or the sudden smell of corned beef and cabbage makes me nervous, or a rainbow popping up out of nowhere, or the sight of a rogue four-leaf clover chills me to the bone. For these are the sights and sounds to let one know of old McGinty's approach, an Irishman who was killed horrifically 3 centuries ago in the Irish hills, laid out against the ground and several large stones placed on top of his body, slowly crushing him to death. He was killed by a horde of vengeful Englishmen for the crime of a love that was not his, a carnal love between him and the magistrate's wife. Even though their love was true and burned with 1,000 lifetimes of passion, it was cruelly snuffed out by her abusive husband, the magistrate. Their love was ripped apart that fateful day when he was put to the stone, and with his dying breath, clutching the charm bracelet his love had made for him, he swore he would return to seek his vengeance. Legend has it, he returned one fine rainy Irish night and bludgeoned the men who killed him to death with his shillelagh. And it is told, when he finally got to the magistrate, he was particularly violent. He took his time and tortured the bastard who took his true love away from him. He boiled, ripped, and cut pieces off the magistrate that would leave him useless to a woman, and left him to bleed out and die. You would think revenge would have put old McGinty to rest, but he became a vengeful, hateful spirit, unable to be with his true love even in the afterlife, for she snuffed out her own flame and doomed herself to a lifetime of purgatory when he died, for she could not live a life without her love. So he returns each St. Patrick's Day to seek out his bloodlust and delve out pain with his shillelagh, so others can feel the pain he feels. So if you're sitting alone and get a waft of cabbage and start to hear the clanking of charms, you best run. Don't even turn around, for it's the charms on McGinty's wrist clanking as he raises his arm up, ready to bring his shillelagh down on you. The Banshee by TheMahanglin. My father passed away around 2 years ago now, and I had flown out to the Pacific Northwest to be at his deathbed, along with the rest of my family. So I was the last one to arrive, and we began a 2-day-long vigil of sorts. He had been out of it for days, with the morphine and all, but when I got there he became totally lucid for about 5 minutes, remarking on my haircut and other totally mundane things, etc. My family was astounded. It was the first real lucidity he'd had in weeks. Anyway, so I went upstairs to get some sleep around midnight, just lying on top of one of the beds with the door open, clothes still on. I was startled from a semi-sleep at 2:30 a.m. by the most horrendous scream I've ever heard in my life. I about fell down leaping out of the bed and ran down the stairs to find nothing at all. My dad's bed was in the living room next to the big double doors looking out on the Cascade mountain range. He was asleep and out of it. My sister was sound asleep in the chair next to him, and my brother and his wife were in the bedroom adjacent to the living room. Again, sound asleep. My mom was asleep on the couch next to his bed. Imagine the sound of a screaming woman, but like sped up. It was a 5-second-long sustained screech, that cut off at the end, like someone played a recording of a scream, but left out the beginning and end. It was long enough that it woke me up, and I was standing when it ended, so it was not a dream by any means. My first thought was that my dad was gone and my sister was screaming. She's not like that, but it's all I could think of. He passed away peacefully 6 hours later, all of us by his side. So, I haven't said anything to anyone except my wife. It wasn't until months later that I was reading an article about the Banshee, and I instantly knew that's what it was. My family is Irish, and from what I've read, it can run in families. One of my cousins had a similar experience back in the 70s. I'd forgotten about that. If anyone else on this sub has ever heard a Banshee, I really want to know others' experiences. Paranormal Encounter at Cooneen, Ireland by Psymanbee. I'm a part of a paranormal team in Northern Ireland called Northwest Paranormal Research. We visit haunted locations all over the island of Ireland, but this one is probably the worst of all. We parked the cars about 500 feet from the actual house, walked up a bit of the road, then up the lane, where at the time we all lined with a dense forest. We go inside the run-down old cottage. No power or anything here. We set up our gear. A locked-off camera and a microphone in each of the 3 rooms. We settle down in the center room, where the open fireplace is. I have my laptop running, recording from all the microphones. So we settle down and do some EVPs. 3 minutes bursts. In a few, we get what we think are replays, but on amplifying it, sounds like animals around the house. About 11:30 p.m., we are all sitting in our chairs, having a break, coffee and sandwiches, when we hear a loud noise, this from the room beside us. We all jump up and run in. With all lit torches on, we look around to see what could have made such a noise, but there's nothing of such a weight to do so. So, in our heads, we're all thinking, it's all gonna kick off now. But it doesn't. Not for another 20 minutes. It gets cold, and I mean Arctic cold. We can see our breath, yet the ambient temperature is 8 degrees Celsius. We hear little ticks, like someone throwing rice or something at us, but we can't see anything. We have 2 night vision cameras, and there's nothing showing up on those either. Then, from the laptop, we can see spikes in the audio, but we can't actually hear anything with our ears. There's definitely something going on, but we can't nail it down. Then Siamhaith hears somebody calling her name, being whispered into her ear. Then I hear mine, but we have no recorded evidence of this, despite having all this tech with us. We pull out a small table and a glass to do divination. And no, this is not like a Ouija board. This is a simpler form of communication. As we have our fingers on the glass, we ask out, "Is there anyone out there that would like to communicate?" The glass immediately starts to swing violently about the table. We ask for the glass to stop, but it doesn't. We decide that it's getting a bit too intense, so we pack up and decide to leave. On our way down the lane, we were just chatting amongst ourselves about the goings-on. As we crossed the ditch at the bottom, I heard these chilling words roared at me, right into my ear.
Never return.
We haven't been back since. Other people have, and have experienced bad things, but we will never return. What Made Me Believe by Vortexol. I was always intrigued by the concept of the supernatural, although I was always extremely skeptical about the whole thing. So naturally, I wanted to see for myself if anything would happen like you see in those shows and YouTube channels. I gathered a few friends and we began exploring haunted places around Ireland. We visited, I believe, 7 or 8 different locations. Some weird things happened, but nothing conclusive, until we went to Fallmore House. I grabbed my cousin and his girlfriend, and we set off to a well-known haunted location in Ireland, Fallmore House. When we got there, it wasn't on the side of a road like a normal building. It was miles down an old, overgrown road that isn't used anymore. After driving for a while down this road, we came to the entrance, which is even more overgrown, and another long walk to the mansion. Getting through it was tough, as the pathway to the place was mostly blocked by bushes and overgrown vines. Anyway, we got there, and the place didn't seem too bad. Although the look of the old building was spooky, I didn't believe it was haunted. We walked through the old mansion and the other smaller buildings that surrounded it. We ended up out at the back end of the house, which was surrounded by forest. We began joking and having fun until we started hearing noises in the trees. It sounded like people walking and whispering to one another. It was getting closer, and we decided to go back to the car, as we were extremely spooked at this point. When we got to the car, we tried an app that could talk to ghosts through this box thing. I can't remember its name. The whole time we genuinely had the feeling we were being watched by something natural or supernatural was yet to be seen. Then my cousin, who had the car running and his reverse camera on, videos himself asking, "Show us a sign in the camera that you are here." Then suddenly, a white figure crosses behind the car. We freak out, and once again we calmed ourselves and stopped videoing and got out to try and debunk it. Now I have to note that it was during summer, and it was a beautiful night, dry and warm with no wind. The car had no exhaust plumes, so that was debunked. We literally couldn't find a reason why it happened. And what made it even weirder is that feeling of being watched, then asking it to show itself, for it to instantly do something. The fact we were in the car for almost an hour at that point, and nothing has happened beforehand. Anyway, we just bounced after that and never went back again. Sorry for the massive book. Just wanted to share. The Banshee by John Quay, 84. I live in a small town in rural Appalachia. The entire area was heavily settled by Irish immigrants over 150 years ago. They brought along their traditions, superstitions, and folklore, and well, a few other things followed along as well. As a child, me and my neighbor boy Mike used to go down and play in the creek together. It was our favorite pastime. We would catch minnows and crawdads, build little dams with rocks and mud, and swim in some of the deeper pools. We used to spend every summer like this. That is, until the summer we both turned 12. It was a hot June day, and we had been swimming in a deep pool that lies a couple miles downstream from our houses. When it turned evening time, we started the long walk back. We were deep in conversation when we came around a bend in the creek, and sitting there on a boulder beside the water was a small, beautiful woman. She was wearing an emerald green dress, covered by a gray cloak. Her hair was incredibly long, and she was brushing it with a silver brush. We both froze and stared. We knew everyone who lived along the creek, and neither one of us had ever seen her before. Her beauty was stunning. After a minute or two, but what seemed like an eternity, she looked up at us. Her appearance immediately changed. Soft and smooth white skin seemed to melt into gray lumpy clay. Her beautiful face now looked more like a half-rotted corpse, and her long, luscious hair fell off in clumps. And then this dead thing began to wail the most blood-curdling and awful sound that I have ever heard. We took off running and ran all the way to Mike's house. When we arrived, we found his mother sobbing uncontrollably, and she looked pale as a ghost. She informed us that Mike's father, a mechanic by trade, had been working under a car when one of the jack stands had given away. His head was crushed, and he died instantly. Mike and his mother moved away a few months after that. I haven't seen him or talked to him since then, though I often think back on this day. Mike's family name was O'Brien, and mine is O'Neill. As an adult, I've started doing a lot of research on my Irish family heritage, and I happened to come across old legends of the Banshee. It is said that each of the original families of Ireland had their own Banshee, a form of the Fae that would herald the death of a family member with her awful wailing or keening. And then yesterday, as I sat on my back porch, sipping on my whiskey, I heard the most blood-curdling and awful sound that I've heard once before. I'm Not a Cannibal by Random Claude. Many people believe that cannibalism is the worst sin one can commit. Eating the flesh of one's own kind, for whatever reason, is often viewed as worse than murder. For that, I'm pleased to say that I am not a cannibal. I've never tasted my own kind, and I never intend to. Of course, that doesn't mean I can't have fun with my meals. You see, I have a rare gift. I'm privy to the world of magical creatures. Most may use this knowledge to become great witches or go on grand adventures, while I simply use it for dinner. Pixies, for example, can be prepared and eaten in much the same way as shrimp, as long as you remove every bit of the exoskeleton. They make for a light and tasty meal. The main problem with pixies, though, is that they're boring. About as intelligent as lizards, they put up no fight, but biting and wriggling like any wild animal. This is why I much prefer bee fairies. Much more of a rush to catch, and their insides, despite being meat, taste just like honey. In the winter, or when I'm looking for something more filling, selkie meat is my go-to. It's fun to find the glint of intelligence in a certain seal's eyes, only to watch that life slip away minutes later. The meat itself is deep red, slightly fishy tasting, and rich with fat. Excellent in a hearty stew. It's like mermaid meat, but better in every way. The mushroom folk are an interesting bunch, to be sure. One would think they taste rancid, living off of decay and all that, but their fresh, earthy taste is to die for. The white mycelium that makes up their bodies is impossible to overcook and can be eaten like noodles with some soy sauce. It's entertaining to know that due to how fungus functions, they're still partly alive for the first half of the cooking process. I was puzzled over how to prepare dryad flesh for the longest time. The outer skin looked and felt like an animal, but the blood smelled of sap, and the bones were literally wooden. Eventually, I just put it in the pot with vegetable stock and some wild herbs I'd gathered while out lumberjacking. The resulting soup was a forest of flavor. My latest culinary venture is sure to be the most satisfying of all. a changeling steak. Changelings are tricky. They can look like humans, talk like humans, even think like humans, but they provide lovely red meat with plenty of marbled fat and a slight floral aroma when cooking. I suspect that last point to be due to their fairy lineage, the same reason they can rot so quickly. Hence why I had to keep the changeling alive in my basement so he'd remain fresh. Now, the screaming has finally stopped, and I can enjoy my dinner. I'll rest easy tonight, knowing I've never eaten another human being. Thus, I am not a cannibal. Eat your breakfast. Unknown author. I was about to order my 5th whiskey sour at Kelly's Irish Pub in Kansas City when this beautiful woman pulls out the squeaky stool next to me and sits down. I continue staring straight ahead, but can't help noticing her eyeballing me with a sincere desire to talk to me. When the bartender sets my drink down in front of me, I ask her what she's having. "I'll just have a sugar-free Red Bull. Thank you." "So, you come to a bar to get energized, huh?" "Well, I'm heading in the opposite direction." I tried to sound funny and charming, but I probably came off sounding like a drunk asshole. She stuck around though, so obviously it didn't bother her. Just overanalyzing every word I say to a woman, as usual. "Let me guess. You're a journalist," the gorgeous stranger said with a smirk. "Wow, good guess. I review B&Bs throughout the continental United States. All in all, not a bad way to make a living, since they kiss your ass and give you everything for free while you're there." As the stranger raised her Red Bull, she proposed a toast. "Here's to a great career that was tragically cut short." We tapped our drinks together and took a sip. "There are some sick people out there. It's truly horrific, the things they're capable of," she said with an odd absence of emotion. "What did you just say? What made that thought pop into your head?" I said, as a chill ran through my body, along with a horrible sense of unease. The pretty stranger tucked her beautiful blonde hair behind her ears before responding. "I just feel it's polite to let people like you know what's coming so you can enjoy your final moments on Earth." "All right, well, fuck you. You can pay for the drinks, 'cause I'm getting out of here." I took one last sip. "Good night to you too, ma'am." The pub was only 3 blocks away from my apartment. As I walked up the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment 4D, I suddenly felt a chill run down my spine, forcing me to turn around. And there she was, naked. I was mesmerized by her killer body and apparently asked her to come in for coffee at 1:23 a.m. on a Saturday night. "Do you want to have breakfast in bed in the morning?" "Only if you cook it," I said with a chuckle that she did not return. Am I missing something here? For you see, poor soul, I will in fact be cooking breakfast, but you will be dead and won't be able to cook, which is too bad, since you have to miss out on a delicious meal provided by you. You're fucking with me, right? I mean, who the fuck eats another human? When he collapsed to the floor, the sexy stranger began preparing him for breakfast while watching the mesmerizing golden sunrise that morning. Beautiful Brigid by Random Claude. As a kid, Brigid was always told that she was beautiful. The fact that she was adopted was never a secret. She didn't look anything at all like her family, so her mother made sure Brigid knew that her differences didn't make her any less of a beautiful girl. Thus, Brigid began school feeling like the prettiest girl in class. In 4th grade, something changed. Whales, once beautiful creatures, became an insult. Yearbook photos were scrutinized, clothes sizes were compared, and between learning math and history, Brigid learned that she was fat. Furthermore, she learned that fat meant ugly. Her arms and thighs and belly made her less than the other girls, less smart, less strong, less beautiful. Brigid's mother insisted that there was nothing wrong, that Brigid was supposed to look the way she did. But Brigid thought otherwise. She was supposed to be beautiful, thus she had to lose weight. So she ran laps at recess instead of playing with the others and ate only the soggy salad from her lunch tray. Soon after, puberty came in all its suddenness, spattering her face with freckles and sending her growing like a weed. It also tried, frustratingly, to wrap her body in fat. She worked twice as hard after that, only ever eating to appease her mother. Her efforts were not in vain, because at 13, Brigid could now wear clothes that she was too big for at 10. Her classmates commented on how much better she looked, and speculated that she would be the prettiest freshman when they started high school next year. Finally, Brigid was beautiful again. As her 14th birthday approached, however, Brigid's thoughts turned away from school. The sea, the sea, the sea. A part of her called out, even more ancient than the part that now constantly cried for food. She told her family that it was time, and she would be back soon. Her mother protested, asking her to stay just a little longer, but Brigid was already out the door. As she walked to the beach on that frosty January morning, Brigid imagined how elegant she'd look in the water. When she got to the end of the pier, however, she paused. There was a gust of wind, and for the first time that she could remember, she felt deeply cold. She wrapped her coat tighter and stepped off the edge. As she fell, she pulled it fully around herself and hit the water as a seal. Instantly, Brigid knew something was wrong. She yelped. She tried to swim but couldn't. The cold enveloped her. It was colder than she had ever imagined cold could be. Screaming bubbles into dark water and desperately moving her flippers, she sank. Brigid realized her grave mistake just before she blacked out. Hours later, Brigid's body washed ashore, her spirit long gone, leaving behind a skeletal form that even scavenging gulls avoided. Nobody had ever seen a skinnier seal, and the sight was anything but beautiful. would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.